All right, I'm going to get us started because I know Julie is allowed to talk about, and you all have a lot to talk about in the chat. So welcome, I'm Linda Braun, and I'm the CE consultant for YALSA, and I'm happy to have you all here for our Teen Read Week 2018 webinar on diverse collection development. And just in case you haven't figured it out yet, the chat link is at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and join the chat. Please chat throughout. I'm going to collect questions for Julie. She's also going to be looking now and again at the chat. So feel free to keep chatting throughout the webinar. We are recording this, and tomorrow I'll be sending out a link to everyone who registered. So you will be able to go back, and those who weren't able to attend will be have access to the recording. So I am going to turn it over to Julie at this point. And if you also have any questions, feel free to chat while Julie is on. So Julie, thank you, and you are on.
Thank you so much. I have to reference a comment somebody just made. Randy said that my students look like they're dropping a hit single. I love that so much. I'm going to have to use that. I am Julie Stivers. I'm the librarian at Mount Vernon Middle School. It's an alternative school in Wake County. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I have to say goodbye to these gorgeous students for just a second here. If I can get my slides to work. Here we go. Okay. Welcome to Diverse Collecting 2.0, taking a deep dive. But I'm actually going to start by dismantling my own title. I am actually not crazy about the word diverse, not in terms of how we use it sometimes in the library world, not in regards to collecting. I think it really sets up this norm that is white, straight, cisgender, able, Christian, and then sets all other realities as something that's other, something that's apart. Two of my favorite authors can speak about this more eloquently. Right, Melinda Lowe says, right, diversity is not praiseworthy, right? It's reality. It's not something that we pat ourselves on the back for. It's something that is, and that we respond to and that we build on. And then Daniel Jose Older, another one of my favorite pictures. If you look at Jada and then look at that cover. When we fight for diverse books, we're really just fighting for a more honest literature, books that tell the truth, because when we say we need diverse books, we're really saying we need books that don't lie to us about who we are or whether we exist. Both of these authors, Melinda Lowe and Daniel Jose Older, they write about issues of representation in think pieces that are amazing and scholarly articles, in addition to also writing amazing fiction. And I love the terms they use: reality, real, honest, truth. I think also calling books diverse books can perpetuate this notion that these books are only good for our diverse readers, and we know that's 100% false. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So with that, I will say welcome to Collecting 2.0, taking a deep dive. And this is, of course, connected to YALSA's Teen Read Week with the theme It's Written in the Stars, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later too. Okay, has anyone ever been on another webinar, right? Not a YALSA one, of course, but another one, or at a session and the presenter does not cover at all what was in the session description? I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I'm guessing that it has, right? And I don't want to do that. So that's why this slide is kind of keeping me honest to what I said I was going to cover. So we're going to run through that list. I definitely want some time for people to share in the chat things that they have done. Any questions they might have, but more I'm interested in also like hearing all of your wisdom and experience and great ideas that you have. Okay, I bet this happens to people on this webinar too. When other librarians know that you are passionate about reflective books or inclusive libraries, you get asked a lot for a diverse book list or a list of multicultural books to buy. And if you can see me, I'm putting like air quotes around multicultural books to buy. And I really struggle with this, right? I love that that person is thinking that direction. But let's say you were changing schools or age ranges at a public library, or you were going from high school to elementary or toddler time to teen librarianship, and you asked another librarian at your new age range for a list of books to buy, right? The response would be like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. There's too many. There's a multitude of lists. I can't make a list of those books. It's too complex for that. And that's how I feel about providing a diverse book list, right? That issue is more complex than any list. Any list I provided would be outdated tomorrow. And I don't know the teens, right, at everyone's library, so it's impossible for me to build a collection that's truly reflective of those teens. Therefore, I'd much rather just provide tools and frameworks to use so we can all create our own unique and powerful lists, our own unique and powerful collections. And also, there's so many great lists out there. I know these are really tiny. I'm not expecting you to be able to see them. They're actually just linked. And I'm going to share a bit.ly at the end that has the slide deck. So everything that's linked here, you can go back and look at anything that you wanted to link. There's the YALSA YA top 10, graphic novels top 10, quick picks, right? Of course, there's the teens top 10, in addition to the prints. And I mean, and that's just from YALSA. There's all of these great lists that are out there. Of course, there's the Stonewall and the Credit Scott King and the Pure Girl Prey, which I'm so excited YALSA is partnering with to expand the Pure Girl Prey to YA. There are so many sources out there, and we'll be talking about some of those resources later on. Okay, I am guessing that you've seen this before, this infographic. And I just want to make a quick side note. I always struggle with how much background to offer, right? A librarian might be on this webinar that's just kind of starting the journey to make their collections more reflective, either of their own community or reflective of our country as a whole. Or you could be out there so immersed in this world, right? You should be leading this webinar. I totally get that. So I'm trying to hit somewhere that works for all of us. So this infographic is too important to not cover. Of course, it's built on the evocative imagery from Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop of Books as Mirrors. And we can see that there are more youth books that reflect animals and trucks than any racial demographic besides white when we're looking at what was published in the year 2015. As this is based on 2015 publishing data, coincidentally, the 2014-2015 school year happened to be the first year that in public schools K-12 nationwide, students of color represented more than 50% of the population. And of course, that increases every year. I share this infographic, right, not to depress us when we look at these extremely low numbers for our African-American teens, our Asian teens, our Latinx teens, our Native teens. It's horrifying, right? And depressing, but let's get angry instead of sad and use that anger to really galvanize us. When we compare these percentages to our own library demographics or the demographics of our county, state, country, it's clear how we have to be intentional, fierce, and anti-racist to ensure that our numbers and our collection do not look like this. For me in my school, the number that jumps out most egregiously is the Latinx figure, 2.4%. When my school population of Latinx students is about 45%. Black literature is only marginally better in terms of percentages, 7.6 as compared to my school population of about 40, right? Again, intentional, fierce, and anti-racist every time we purchase books and then display, book talk, and promote them. I'm actually curious which figures jump out to you as the most galvanizing when you think of your own public or school library. So I'd love to hear some of those in the chat. It's all awful, but for most librarians looking at this, there'll be one number that really stands out. So unfortunately, these numbers, of course, are even worse than they first appear, for this is just quantitative data on the main characters in published books. These numbers don't take into account who the book is written by, if it's filled with stereotypes or problematic tropes. This is why it's important to go beyond the mirror analogy by focusing on own voices and counter stories, which I'll get to in just a moment. I'm looking through the chat real quick, just to kind of see. Okay. One of the reasons why I love this infographic so much, I mean, I hate it, right? I hate what it represents, but I love the infographic because it so powerfully shows. I mean, look at the white kid. All of his mirrors, right? He is a king and an athlete and a robber. He's got all of these multiple stories and multiple futures. If you choose any other youth, look at our Native youth. It's a tiny like shard of a mirror. They don't even get to see their whole story, right? Much less multiple ones. I think sharing this infographic with staff can be really powerful, especially for those of you in schools, because your colleagues are not in this world at all. But even for public librarians, I would share with all my colleagues, no matter their age range. This year I did a staff book club on The Hate U Give, and I called it a staff book club just so people would sign up. But what it really was I was framing the educational equity using YA literature to do it, Own Voices YA literature. And we talked about representation, inclusivity, and equity in education. And I shared this in our first day, and it was eye-opening. Like every teacher was like, I had no idea. And part of me wanted to say, well, where have you been? But then part of me was just really glad that their eyes had been opened up to it. Yes, I would love to see this broken out for YA books too, Anna. Just put that in the chat. I would like to see the data teased out even more, which is a perfect segue to this. The deep dive is still to come. As far as I know, and I didn't look again this morning, but I don't think an infographic has come out about the data from 2017. When we look at these numbers, we can see that there's been some increase in visibility, but still widely underrepresented own voices, where the author, of course, is a member of the marginalized community that's centered in the novel. Some are calling 2017 the year of the brown-skinned child. Right? This is especially true in picture books, where there's an unspecified race or ethnicity, and there's no visible cultural markers in the story or the art, but just this beautiful brown-skinned child in the pictures. And without those cultural markers, that's its own kind of problem. Really quickly, I just wanted to share, of course, this advocacy is not new. There have been champions for more representation in literature for such a long time. I've just listed some names here quickly: Charlotte Hill Rollins, Pure Beaupre, of course, Augusta Baker, of course, Walter D. Myers. And recently, and I'll be talking about these names later when I talk about widening our review sources, but Debbie Reese and Edie Campbell and Laura Jimenez and Sarah Park Dalen and Ebony Thomas. I just think it's important to frame what other conversation I'm having in a context and a conversation that obviously is much bigger and greater than anything that I'm going to say. There's a book here, and I love thinking about this because even when we think about own voices or the call for representation not being new, this is from 1939. It's called Tobe, and it was put out by the UNC Press, and it was written in response to a student's question about why none of the books had kids that looked like him. So at the bottom, there is a link to a story about this book if anyone is interested. Okay, I see people sharing great information in the chat, which is awesome. I can't wait to go back and look at this. Okay, I have to be perfectly honest with you. My next few slides are really not built to be engaging for this space. They're going to be text heavy, and they're really just here as a resource for us as we dive into this a bit more. Again, I'm going to share the slides out so you'll have the link. So this is for, if you know all this already, great. We're going to go through these pretty quickly. If this is something maybe you thought, oh, I need some research on that, or I wanted a refresher, then you could go back and look at these slides. I've lost track of the number of white librarians who come up to me after listening to something I've said or presented on, and they say, oh, that's so nice, but I don't have any diverse teams, right? This has happened to people on this call. Right? And I take a deep breath and I'm like, right? First of all, I always politely say that, of course, they do have diverse teams, right? Because even if a group appears racially homogenous, they might not be. But also there's such rich and powerful diversity in terms of ability and mental health status and gender identity and religion and country of origin and language spoken in the home and sexual orientation. You can imagine the look that this usually wins me. And I quickly transition into this kind of feedback on this screen, right? And that is, exposure to diverse cultures and literature is important for all teams. Even if your community population matches or looks like that infographic we saw, we still need to do better with representation for the benefit for all of our teams, right? Increased academic performance, and these are buzzwords that seem to really hit librarians and educators. Increased engagement in reading, that one is clearly hugely important. Better pro-social development, college and career readiness, that's the one that's like the most buzzword that really hits people sometimes. These are all from a great Lee and Low blog post, great independent publisher that's linked at the bottom. Okay. So as librarians, we of course know that our audience shouldn't read and listen at the same time, but I'm totally doing it for just a couple slides here. So again, this is here for anyone to use the links later or dive into this information if they need a refresher. So counter stories are those which challenge or oppose the dominant narrative about a community that's typically depicted, right? They are necessary to negate that single story. And linked in this screenshot is Chimamanda Adichie's seminal talk on the danger of a single story. It's here for your viewing pleasure to watch or rewatch. I rewatch it every couple months, just because it's so powerful. Counter stories are advantageous to all of our students. When we think about our students of color, look at that fourth bullet. By affirming their vision of the world, well-written, authentic, multi-ethnic children's literature can provide healing from the damages of living in a racist society. Wow, this study was from 2010. Think about 2018, right? What crucial work provide healing from the damage of living in a racist society? Obviously, books are not enough, but they are absolutely necessary. Look at the fifth bullet. Dominant race audiences, in other words, white people, can enrich their own reality through listening to the stories and counter stories of parallel cultures. Again, we know this as librarians, right? We know this intuitively as powerful peddlers and advocates of story, but it's always nice to have the research and the scholarly articles to back you up, right? Whether for administration, library directors, whoever is controlling the money when you're trying to collect. I just saw a couple chat questions about the TED Talk. Yes, the danger of a single story, and it's linked right there. So you can click on it and it'll come up to the link to watch. Okay, own voices. Yeah, this is another bad slide in terms of a webinar, but hopefully a good slide just if you need background info on the concept of own voices, which of course, again, is books which are written by an author who's a member of the marginalized community or communities that are centered in the novel. That screenshot links to an article explaining the history of the hashtag. And then I pulled several passages that were very meaningful to me here. I'm going just to draw your attention to the bolded text. Let me move some of my pictures here. Okay. There's an extra degree of nuance and authority that comes with writing from lived experience. And then the author has the deepest possible understanding of the intricacies, the joys, the difficulties, the pride, the frustration, and every other possible facet of that particular life, because the author has actually lived it. I just found those, pullouts from the article to be particularly beautiful. I'm including here another link, and this is to a YALSA blog post that ties the Own Voices movement into other aspects of representation, including intersectionality. So it's here for you if you're interested. I absolutely think it's worth a full read if you haven't read it. I have just one pullout answer from the author there if you want to just look at that real quickly to know whether in your mind you're like, yep, I'm going back to read that article. So I'm going to pause just for a second. Okay, these text-heavy slides are almost over. One more crucial framework to be cognizant of is enabling text. This was created by Dr. Alfred Tatum in the book Pictured Reading for Their Life, Rebuilding the Textual Lineages of African-American Adolescent Males. He's outside the library world, so sometimes his work may not be familiar to us as librarians. It's incredibly powerful. He's written additional books to this one. He created kind of 8 characteristics of an enabling text. I'm going to read through them real quick just because they're short. Promote a healthy psyche, reflect an awareness of the real world, focus on the collective struggle of people of color, position the characters of color as having agency. That one is so key. Serve as a roadmap for being, doing, thinking, acting. Recognize, honor, nurture multiple identities. Demonstrate resiliency and interesting and provocative. Of course, we just don't slap a book in our library because it has a person of color on the cover. We're looking deeper than that. Is every book in our library going to be an example of an enabling text? No. But the books that we choose for lit circles or to book talk or to heavily promote, to buy class sets of, if we're in a school, these should be enabling texts. It should be something that we're kind of thinking of in the back of our head. Also linked here is an enabling text rubric. It was adapted to represent a wide range of marginalized youth in addition to African-American males who are the focus of Dr. Tatum's work. Sandra Hughes Hassel's on the call. I am 99.9% sure that she developed that rubric, so I will give a call out. Okay, someone said enabling text needs some examples. That is such a great question. Sandra, who I'll mention again, who's on the call, Sandra Hughes Hassel, we've done some presentations on enabling text. Enabling texts are amazing. So enabling text would be something like, well, most of the current Own Voices books I can think of, like The Hate You Give is definitely an enabling text. I think it would follow all of these. Jason Reynolds is an amazing example of enabling text. It's hard for me to think of a book that I collect all the time that's Own Voices that isn't enabling text. An enabling text follows these 8 kind of touch points. Meg Medina would be another one. Yes, so I would love for Laura or Sandra or someone, I'm going to keep going. So Own Voices isn't the same thing. I would say that more Own Voices are enabling text when they're dealing with people of color than people writing outside of their race. Of course, there's exceptions to that. I would say Anderson is an exception to that, but in general, but they are different. Own Voices is just that you wrote a book that has the same community as what you identify with. And enabling text has these markers in it. Okay, I would love to talk about this more. I'm actually going to go to something which might make it a little clearer. This is how I think about it. Let me click here. Okay, someone said they're having trouble hearing me. I'm going to move towards my computer a little bit more. Okay, this is a picture of Jada. I think a really accessible way to think of these frameworks from enabling text to counter stories is in this picture, and then a really quick story. Jada is one of 3 8th graders that were in a special enrichment group with me. Enrichment, that's such a crazy school type word. It really means nothing and everything. It was a time she didn't have a regular class, and I could pull her and a small team into the library for a special project. We were, and still are, creating professional development for librarians on what makes an inclusive library and all that entails. At the end of this webinar, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this project. So this day, we had been looking at the same infographic that we just reviewed. You can see it on the table in front of her. I had tasked Jada, Jose, and Cesar with doing some participatory research, and they were writing down elements of the library, my school library, that they liked. Right? Later, of course, I asked them about things they didn't like. It wasn't one-sided, I promise. But on this day, Jada was focusing on things that she liked. And I want to draw your attention to her very first bullet point. Okay, good. I'm glad my sound is better. I'm sorry I was getting quiet there. Okay, Jada's first bullet point, in case you can't see it, says this. She wrote, "Black people look good." And I was fairly sure I knew what she meant, but I had Jada unpack it for me so I could put it in her words, not mine. She said, "The books here don't show Black people as slaves or in chains or being yelled at by white people, but they show," and I quote, "Black people just living their best lives being normal." I think that's so powerful, right? It sums up a huge part of my collection development framework, and Jada recognized that. Does that mean I don't collect books about struggle? You can see that was actually one of Dr. Tatum's enabling text touch points, or books that show hardships. Of course not. But when I do, they're absolutely always written by Black authors. Again, we're going to touch on this a bit later when I talk about the Lib 5, but Black people look good became one of our 5 key foundations to make libraries more inclusive. I kept it exactly the same because no one can say it better than Jada did, and I wish she was here to say it in person because when she says it, she does a little spin. Okay, so I'm going to move on from that. Okay, so problematic reviews. As we select books, we of course search out reviews. Events over the past several years have highlighted the limitations of major review sources, and I recognize that this is probably familiar to a lot of you. For example, When We Was Fierce, it was a highly, highly anticipated book by the author of Fat Angie. Fat Angie was a book that I absolutely loved. It was definitely an example of Own Voices literature. When We Was Fierce was not. It was written by an author of color, but she was writing outside of her own community and telling a story of an African-American teen. It received positive and starred reviews from multiple sources. You can see them up there on the screen. And then African-American reviewers read it and were horrified. This picture that has Crazy Quilt Edie at the top links to an excellent blog post written by Edie Campbell and Jen Baker, explaining their concerns with the novel, and many other authors, reviewers, and scholars also then voiced their concern. The publisher pulled the novel initially, but it was eventually released in a limited, somewhat secret way, and there's copies out there. Just this morning, I checked on Amazon, and you can get copies. It only has 3 reviews. One of them is by Edie Campbell, which was awesome. This is just one example. Both Black Magic and The Continent are other examples of books with initially strong reviews, even starred mainstream reviews. And then when critical in-depth reviews were done by independent reviewers, very often reviewers of color, they highlighted problems with the novels. To me and to all of us, this just highlights the need to also have own voices reviewers. When we think of own voices, that can't only be with the writing of the novels, sometimes it's looking critically at the novels too. So to flip it positively, if we think about problematic reviews, it's just widening our review sources. We can't rely on only the major outlets alone. I've listed here some of my favorite Twitter follows for reviews. This list includes reviewers, authors, and publishers, and each one is a direct link. I'm not going to shame anyone by asking who is or who is not on Twitter, but I recommend it with every part of my librarian's soul. I could not have as good of a collection as I do without Twitter. I've made some of the handles bigger. This is just if I had to prioritize the list. Those of you who are on Twitter, give this list a look. Who am I missing that you rely on for balanced review sources? Okay, awesome. I'm writing down all the ones that come up. I'm going to write down to look at later. But if you can see in the chat, then we can look at them. Flying Tights, I'm going to sing. Devera, thank you. Oh, awesome. I love them already. Flying Tights, graphic novels and comics. I love it. Oh, 5 Press. I should have that on there too. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, awesome. So Flying Tights, 5 Press. I absolutely should have had that on there, but Flying Tights is new for me. Thank you. Okay, so if you're not on Twitter yet, please consider it. Don't think of it as adding something to your plate. Think of it as making your job easier and your practice better. I have a really quick question for you. I want you to imagine you're coming into work every day, right? And you open Chrome or whatever internet browser that you use. Like, where do you go first, right? I open email, I open Twitter, and then I open my ordering platform every day, right? Do I order books every day? Of course not, right? I'm a school librarian, right? Like, I am fighting for money a lot of times. I open up my ordering platform every day. And the reason I do that is so when I'm on Twitter and something comes up and I learn about a title from a trusted source and I read about it right then, I can immediately add it either to a wish list or to an order list. I'll give you a couple examples just to show. So this is, I think, and I realize that everyone on this call might not do the ordering, right? But if you're making a wish list or books that you're going to pay special attention to when they come in. So here is a tweet from Ebony Teach. I think of people that I only know on Twitter just as their Twitter handle. So to me, this brilliant scholar is Ebony Teach. And she was tweeting out this picture of, at that time, they were both ARCs. I realize that they've come out now. They were both ARCs. And if Ebony Teach is tweeting out some ARCs that she's excited about, and then I find out that she thought they were great, right? I'm absolutely going to add those to a wish list. Here's another one. Let me just move my chat window here. I see people talking about graphic novels. We're going to talk about graphic novels a little bit later. You know, somebody tweeted out and it was a link. I almost think of Twitter as like, it's a list that you can curate of people that think the way you do, right? And people that don't think the way that you do, people that are from other communities that have experiences that you don't have. So if someone tweets out this link, 13 upcoming YA books by Latinx authors to start getting excited about right now, I mean, that's like candy. right? Like I jump on that link immediately to read. Of course, both of those books are amazing. Sorry, my slides are a little weird. Whenever I move my chat box, it gets funny. Okay, and then Debbie Reese, this book, right, Code Talker Stories. I had never heard of that book from another like mainstream review source. But as soon as Debbie tweeted out and I saw that picture, like, you know, my fist went up in the air. I was so excited because I'm always trying to bring in more reflective and diverse nonfiction titles for my library. Okay. Okay, we are just going to look at one more quick framework, and then we're going to switch gears and talk about assessments a little bit. Okay. I want to touch on the depth of our collections a little bit. So we all have these books for good reason. And as I'm looking at these, I see that for the most part, they skew middle grade instead of YA. But we can imagine the same for with YA books. Books, they're wonderful, right? But to me, this is very surface level collecting of reflective books, what I call the big four: historical fiction, social issue books, biographies, and award winners, right? I have these books, of course, and every school library and public library has these books. And they're lovely, but it's not enough. Melinda Lowe says it better than me, says it perfectly when she says that, yes, we need books that address race and racism, but we also need books where characters of color can simply have the same kind of plot-driven adventures that white characters have all the time. Right, books like these. And for these, I think I did a better job of making them all YA. I'm a middle school librarian, so I live in a middle grade and YA world of making these more skewed more towards YA. Right, books like these: fantasy, sci-fi, romance, plot-driven adventures. Right, think of Jada, people of color living their best lives, living normal lives. Imagine your own reading taste, right? Do you only want to read biographies, social issue books, and historical fiction? I don't, right? I want some fantasy and romance and sci-fi and humor. I want a wide, deep collection, and our teens deserve nothing less. When we think about the theme of this year's Teen Read Week, Written in the Stars, well, to take that really literally, right, we need to be promoting books where the characters that are out in the stars represent a wide range of identities. I've lost my chat box. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick, because otherwise somebody could be saying that something is really wrong and I wouldn't see it. Okay, I got it back. Okay. Right, I love looking at these covers. Can you think of anything more beautiful? I don't have a slide of this, but this is how I decorate my library. There aren't enough posters put out that have reflective characters and books. Look at these covers. There's nothing that I could create that would be more beautiful than that. So I take them to Office Depot and I enlarge them, and then I laminate them at my school, and that's what I paper my uncaps with and above all my shelves. It's decoration. It's saying what my library is about as soon as people walk in. And it's also like a circulation tool, because people will see something on the wall and then they'll want it. Who pays for that? So it's really, it's only $1.17 a piece to make the copy. So, and then I laminate it at my school. So it's pretty cheap. So I can do like the whole library for under 50 bucks. I would like to say my school pays for it. Sometimes I pay for it. It depends if I'm organized with the receipts and what's going on in my school. I'm probably being way too honest on this webinar, but that's okay. Okay. Any last thing here? I'm going to click off. I see a book here. Everyone, real quick, like look at all these. I see some here I haven't read yet. Trail of Lightning is my #1 that I am can't wait to read. Okay, I'm going to click off this page, even though it's painful, even though I just asked you a question about it. Okay, let me check my time. Okay, we're doing okay. Okay. Doing audits and assessments of our collection can be a really powerful tool. Of course, our collections are being assessed every day by our teens, and that data is extremely valuable, right? That's our front line, to listen, to watch, to notice what our teens respond to, what they skip over, right? Where are the slide overs in our collection? Additional, more formal audits are of course also valuable. I've linked two here that are very different but both powerful. The first is from Karen Jensen in Teen Library and Toolbox. And the link here takes you to the first of several blog posts on an extremely extensive audit she and her colleagues did at her library, and then as well as a PDF she produced of the process. They audited like the entire collection. It was an extreme investment. The second is from Crawling Out of the Classroom, and this is from Jess the Fifth. Again, that's how I know her. If you're on Twitter, especially if you work with younger students in addition to teens, but even if you only deal with teens, I would follow Jess the Fifth. She is a 5th grade teacher, and she blogs extensively about racial bias, unpacking racism with kids, and critically looking at books. And this link takes you to an exercise where she had her students analyze her classroom library, which could be easily adapted for us in any library with different age ranges. Okay, I'm sorry, I keep getting caught up by looking at the chat stuff. Okay, so I'm going to share one with you that I developed for an online course I wrote through YALSA called Building Reflective Collections, Always Teen First. I wrote the course, I taught it twice, and public and school librarians from all different sorts of libraries have done this exercise, and the feedback was positive, otherwise I wouldn't be sharing it with you. It's looking at your collection with a lot of granularity, which can be powerful because you're looking at the book and shelf level, and then you can extrapolate out to a certain extent. It's just a tool. It's not an indictment of your collection or an award. It's not the final word of judgment. It's just a snapshot. So it's here. So it will be here with you in the slides. I'm going to go through it really quickly, right? In a perfect world, we would all have a picture of one of our shelves or be looking at our library. So I'm going to go through it really fast, right? And you're just picking a random shelf. I think it's powerful if you do this in a couple places in your library. You could even have someone else pick the shelf, right, to remove a certain amount of bias that might be there. So the first thing you do is count the number of books on your randomly selected shelf. This is our N number. And then you're going to count the number of books you're trying to get. This is like our reflective or our diverse or inclusive list. The number of books with feature a main character from a marginalized community, right? It could be race, ability, it could be religion, it could be someone in the foster care system, someone who a teen's experiencing homelessness. This is what it means to you, a marginalized community. Right, and then this is the set of books that we'll be working with a lot. When I get to this point, someone always says, well, I'm on our shelf, right? If this was in my school library, Jason Reynolds' books they're never checked in. I have a really small school. I have like 30 of his books on the shelves. They're never checked in, right? So either I would suggest picking another shelf, or if you know, right, you would have a book there included. This doesn't have to be scientific. It's more a mindset of looking at it. Okay, let me pull up. Okay, so then that's just your first checkpoint, right? You would take R and divide it by N, and this is your percentage of, quote, diverse books on the shelf, right? And you can think about that and think, what are your goals for this number in your library? You know, I don't know if that's something that we always consciously say to ourselves or have in our collection development plan. My school is about 80 to 85% students of color. My goal for that number is about 80 to 85%. Okay, but think about that. Even if this exercise only makes you think about that goal for your library, then I think it's valuable. Okay, let's see where we're going next. Okay, unfortunately, right, this percentage is akin to the numbers on that starting infographic. So just like those numbers, it can only get worse. And again, I have worse in quotes, the more we dive in. Okay, and then this is just looking at your R books only, your, quote, diverse books that are. Here we want to see how many are own voices. So you would count the number of own voices books. So this is the only negative feedback that I have gotten back from this exercise is one of my participants said, well, that's so creepy. You know, you're like, want me to stalk an author to find out their identity. That's not at all what I'm saying. She was particularly thinking in regard to identity in regards to LGBTQ+. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying to do either if you know of the author, like someone like Tim Federley, who's very out and is talking about his identity, or you read a bio and you find out, right? If you don't know, that's fine. I'm not passing judgment on authors or expecting people to do some kind of like half-hour search per person. It's just a really quick way to kind of gauge. Okay, and then for this number, right, when you do V divided by R, how high do we want this, right? I feel like this number is high as possible, like always increasing, right? If you start out and it's 20%, okay, I'm gonna absorb that number and then I'm gonna focus on growth and move forward. And then the final step, if you're interested in it, because I feel really passionately about the big four, is looking at books that aren't social issue books or historical fiction. I didn't include biographies here because they probably wouldn't be in your fiction section. And I didn't include award winners. Award winners, I actually might have to change my big four idea to big three eventually, because awards are getting better, I think, certainly in the past couple of years in terms of, especially the Newbery Award, I feel like they're doing a much better job. So that's there if you want. And then you can go back to your number and see that percentage. So that is another assessment tool to add to your toolbox. I'd love to hear any feedback. If you do this and you find it to be a useful tool, or you find it to be a horrible tool and you want to tell me why, that's fine too. Okay, anyone has any questions about that? I'm going to move on from assessments. I know we went through fast. Okay, wow, it's 2:40. Okay. Okay. Collection development is social justice. We're really going to go in now a little bit. So here's the thing. I do not make the most beautiful displays. This is how I feel about displays. We don't have the time to make them perfect, or we don't have to take the time to make them perfect. We just have to take the time to make them meaningful. So my displays are not always beautiful or Pinterest worthy, but I hope they're powerful, because that's what I'm going for. So I started the year with this display, and it's actually still there. It's still there now. And it was in direct response to current events. It was advertising that, of course, this library, my library, it takes sides. It takes sides against white supremacy, against cruelty, against institutional racism, against Nazis, which seems really silly to say that out. But I felt like it was important for my students to see when they walked in. You can see right next, there's another one that says this library supports dreamers. There is sometimes discussion amongst librarians as to whether libraries should be neutral, right? Libraries have never been neutral, besides what ridiculousness is going to come out about meetings in our library. Libraries are not neutral, and they shouldn't be. We have to make them brave spaces for our communities, especially for our marginalized communities. Wow, I just saw someone say, I can't do Proud Month on the chat. Gosh, I'm like the dogs in Incredibles. The chat box is like squirrel to me. I keep looking at it, and I should stop looking at it. I'm gonna look at it at the end. Okay, so I have two quotes on this particular shelf that happen to directly tie into collection development, and I'm gonna read them because they may be too small to see. The first is really easy, from Elie Wiesel. Take sides, neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. I think that's self-explanatory, and something maybe that our parent organization needs to hear. The other, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Right? As librarians, as advocates for access, for equity, for representation, for literacy, we can be that change in our communities or in our schools, that change with our books, with these powerful stories from authors of color. Those are just some more of my displays. And like I said, my displays are not beautiful, right? But I try to make them powerful. Okay, there are many books, of course, that have come out, especially in the past few years, that tackle social justice issues head on. Here I linked to an article about Dear Martin from Nick Stone, of course, amazing book. And the article mentions other powerful titles, including All American Boys, Tyler Johnson was here, Ghost Boys, The Hate You Give. I would add some other books to that list. I see these 5 or 6 there all the time. And I'm sure you all have ones you would add. I would add How It Went Down, which I don't see a lot added. And this would be my #1 ad because it is one of my favorite books. And I love it because it's a book in the fantasy world, and it deals with social justice so beautifully. So you're going to connect to fantasy readers who maybe aren't going to read realistic fiction, and then they're still getting that social justice piece in their reading. I love that book so much. And then, of course, speaking of graphic novels, I am Alfonso Jones. So again, we're going to get those kids that love graphic novels and reading something that's so strongly social justice based. Of course, we should joyfully include books which address social justice issues head on, like the titles here. But don't forget these, right? Showing marginalized youth living their lives as lovingly told by authentic writers is social justice, right? Librarianship, if we do it right, should be a form of activism. A quick note here on activities that extend our teens' enjoyment and understanding of what they read, right? Libraries can be such powerful incubators of youth social justice. right? Even using something just as simple as a green screen can be powerful. This is one of my students, Q, and she loved Ghost Boys, Jewel Parker Rhodes, and she wanted a way to share her love for it with all of her followers, right? And online. So she created this digital art with the library's green screen that I love. And then another day we were celebrating reading, and Request had read so many football books this year. This is his celebration of that in an extremely powerful way. I think this image speaks for itself. If I could make a like 20-foot poster of it for my library, I would. It's definitely up on the wall for other people to see. Okay, so I had mentioned the Live 5. I was going to be doing the Live 5. So what is that? Let me explain what that is. And I'm going to try to go through this really quick so we have time to listen to my students. I don't have them here with me, unfortunately, but I have some video content. Cesar, Jada, and Jose work with me to create professional development for librarians on building inclusive library spaces. And there they are, Cesar Falcon, Jada Morris, and Jose Gomez. Okay. Our project was based on an initiative from the Chapel Hill Blue Ribbon Mentors called the Student 6. If you haven't heard of this, which I think ties into public libraries as well, it's a student-led professional development for teachers centering on 6 culturally sustaining strategies for adults to use to better connect with their students of color, right? And I had seen the teens talk and their educator, Teresa Bunner, present on the Student 6. And each time a question came up from the audience of librarians, and you can probably guess what it was. And they asked, what was your experience with school libraries? The answers were lukewarm at best, and none of the teens in attendance had meaningful, positive stories or experiences with their school libraries or librarians, which is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. And sitting there, I thought, well, we need an equivalent for libraries. Hello. I want to hear teens talk about these ideas with a specific lens of libraries. Somebody needs to do this. And then I thought, well, okay, why not us, right? I'm at an alternative school, and our wonderful students have experiences with multiple schools where they were not finding success. And they were able to come to Mount Vernon and rewrite their school stories. And part of that rewriting naturally happens in the library. And I wanted my students to help librarians understand how to build an inclusive library where their students of color were welcomed, valued, and cherished. It's a lot more powerful and authentic coming from students than it is coming from me. And what this project eventually developed in was the Live 5 key foundations for building inclusive libraries. And you've seen this picture before. There's Jada. And we used real research, right? To prepare for building this library PD, Jada, Cesar, and Jose eagerly learned about research that directly related to their topic. We began with Dr. Kafi Kumasi's research, but found that for many students of color, they felt like outsiders in their libraries, and it often seemed like a place that was owned by the librarian. As a foundation for thinking about libraries and students of color, we also looked at the powerful Hanley and Noblet study, which found that for youth of color, positive racial identity leads to academic success. Oh my gosh, I'm going to say that again, just in case you've never heard of this study. For youth of color, positive racial identity leads to academic success. From there, we moved to unpacking the state of representation in books today. We discussed own voices, counter stories, and the necessity of building reflective collections. We looked at that. Oh no, that's not what I wanted to happen. I'm sorry, just a second. Okay, this is one. Okay. Just a second, I'm going to get through this. So my students watch the Student 6. Okay. I'm guessing everyone can hear that. Okay. That is Sweet Maria. Okay, just a second. It's very cool that you're listening to it because it is. Let me get back to it real quick.
It's a weird feeling, right?
Here we go. Okay, that was Erica, and she was one of the Student 6, and she's actually someone that I've seen present a couple times. Okay, let's get back to where I was. Okay, so the students watched that video. That's a good segue. The students watched both of those videos. So they watched the Student 6 to prepare. And then they did library walks. They did library walks in our library. They thought about the libraries where they used to be, both their elementary and middle school libraries. They thought about their experiences with their librarians. They spoke with other students at our school about all of their multiple libraries and their experiences. So I'm going through this super fast, but we spent months and months together coming up with our 5 key foundations for building inclusive libraries, or the Live 5. We wrote a presentation for librarians built around the Live 5 and then delivered that PD. And I'm going to go through these again. So I'm going to go past this. Don't think you won't see those again because you're going to. I want to get to this picture. Okay. We presented at a large district conference in April. My students were in this huge room and they did amazing. And we'll be presenting together at our state library conference this October. I don't have footage of those, but the great folks at Project Ready filmed us doing our presentation just in our own little library. And I'd like to show you just parts of that today. It's not going to be the whole thing, but it's going to be the students specifically talking about the 5 key foundations. We had no audience this day. It has a really casual, informal vibe that I hope you can appreciate it, but the best part is the students. So I'm going to play that right now. Okay, that sounds really slow, light, and I have the volume all the way up. Okay.
This may seem obvious, but it's very different. Fritos, be excited to see us at my last.
It is really low. Can people hear it okay?
Okay.
No,
Okay, I'm gonna take a second and try to. That's so strange because that other video that I was just playing was really loud. This is all the way up. Okay, let me get all the way out just for a second. Most of what they're saying is going to be on the screen. I'm going to take about 30 seconds and see if I can fix it. If I can't, I'm going to go ahead and play it. And because I can also share a link that has the whole video.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even get out of full screen. I'm just going to go ahead and keep playing it. Most of what they say is on the screen. It's on the PowerPoint slides.
At Julie, I was just said at Julie because that's how I'm typing things. I think people just can't like connect really well, so maybe
Okay, I can
keep
stop it.
going. Okay.
I'm having some technical difficulties.
Cool. Well, we can keep chatting in the chat.
Okay.
That's working.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I'll go ahead and stop it. It's not letting me cut out my screen, which is really strange. And I don't want to stop sharing in the middle. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay. I heard some people talking about graphic novels. In the long video is a slide that right after Cesar talked so eloquently about his graphic novels. It's a slide of research backing up how, of course, graphic novels are real books, and also that they have 20% more difficult vocabulary than, quote, regular books. So sometimes teachers or parents that are against graphic novels, when they hear that, right, that opens that up a little bit. Okay, I love that. Devere says, please explain sorting free zone in relation to public libraries. I have to think about that a little bit because I'm so in the context of school libraries. Okay, I'm going to focus on getting this back. Okay, it is not full screen for some strange reason, but I'm just going to keep going because we're almost out of time. Okay, so I'm sorry it doesn't look as good as it should. I'm keeping with what I said at the beginning. I'm not providing a list, but I am including just a slide that includes 2 example categories of must-buys for me. The first is superheroes of color. These are so crucial. We cannot move forward without them. I've listed some examples. These lists are not complete. I'm sure, oh my gosh, I can get so many more. You can give me so many more. They're ones that I collect. I'm always looking for more. And remember, even though Marvel and getting better, especially with the Black Panther world, and it's actually Own Voices literature, and with Coates, and then Roxane Gay writing World of Wakanda and Black Panther and the Crew. Even though some of those have been unfortunately canceled, we should still collect all that they have been put out. Don't forget the indies coming out. I love America Chavez. She's definitely, I collect her in my middle school library. She's amazing. It's Own Voices, and it is a lesbian Latina superhero written by an out lesbian Latina author. It doesn't get any better than that. Okay, I'm going to go really fast because we just have a couple minutes and I want to show you some other resources. I think pop culture, right? We obviously have to honor that in our collection, but when pop culture and Own Voices intersect, like that's where the magic really happens for us, I think. A perfect example is the Black Panther movie. When the Hate You Give movie comes out, yes. Another example is Coco. It's so lovely. It was well reviewed by Own Voices reviewers. And then remember from the beginning, the first number that really jumped out at me as being so horrifying was the Latinx representation that we have. So that's always at the forefront for me. And Pixar really raised the bar with their book tie-ins because they were all written by Latinx authors, including novelizations, a stunning picture book, a middle grade novel adaptation written by Diana Lopez. Really beautiful stuff that can help us build real, honest, reflective collections that kids want to read. This slide simply looks at some of my go-to resources. Again, it is not exhaustive. I would say this, in tandem with the Twitter list that I had talked about before, there's a bit of crossover here. I welcome comments in the chat on your go-to sources that aren't listed here. I do want to, gosh, we have 2 minutes. Okay, I do want to pull your attention to where it says Kat Cole's digital flyer. I'm going to show you what that is. It is right here. And Kat Cole, I think of her as Kat Cole Reads because that is her Twitter handle. She is an elementary librarian in Chapel Hill, and she developed an amazing resource. She has a beautiful library program. I highly recommend following her, Kat Cole Reads. She developed this for educators and librarians. It includes nonfiction for adults and educators, video content, adult fiction, YA, middle grade picture books, TED Talks. It's comprehensive, it's stunning, it's all linked here. It's called Stay Woke, Examining Racism in America. It's excellent, and it's linked right here. The last thing, I just added the slide in last night. I was lucky enough to be an ALA emerging leader, and my group, Juan Rivera, another school librarian, Allie Stevens, Caitlin Frick, Angela Ocaña, and Katie Martin. We worked with ASL and we wrote a toolkit and guide on defending intellectual freedom, LGBTQ materials in school libraries. It goes beyond materials to also talk about curriculum and climate and spaces. Linked here on this slide, both of these pictures are linked, is the toolkit and then the infographic. And you might be wondering, hey, most of us are public librarians. 4 of the people who wrote this guide, 4 of us were public librarians and kept saying how excited they were to share it with their staff, that there was so much crossover between school and public librarians. I want to bring up one part. We frame this with the American Association of School Librarians has a new set of standards out with 6 shared foundations. There were 6 of us, there were 6 shared foundations. We each took a foundation. Allie Stevens, a public librarian in Arkansas, she took Curate. I wanted to point this to you as the kind of information that's in this guide. It has this really cool appendix. It's a YA flowchart. And then she also included a blank flowchart, which I thought would be great to have like a teen advisory board do, or some of your teen patrons with any element of diversity. Of course, this one is specifically for LGBTQ fiction. So that is here. I wanted to point that out to you. Okay, I made it. Wow, it's 3 o'clock. Okay. So there's the bit.ly. It's just at TRW Stivers YALSA. My Twitter handle is BespokeLib. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I will go in right now and link the video. I will put the YouTube link underneath it so everyone can see it. That one that I have actually in the presentation is shorter. It's only about 4 minutes, but there's about a 15-minute one that is the whole presentation, and I'll make sure that's linked.
Thank you, Julie. That was really great. And I apologize that Zoom freaked out a little bit too with your slide deck. So thanks. Also, tomorrow I will send everyone that registered the recording and a reminder of where the slide deck is and a link to the chat transcript so everybody can see that as well. Really appreciate that everyone came to this amazing webinar. It really was amazing, Julie. Thank you. And so we will be doing more about cultural competency, cultural humility, diversity, collecting over the next several months. So stay tuned for what's coming next and enjoy your Teen Read Week in a few months. Thanks, everybody.